Good evening and welcome to our final keynote presentation of our Brother Luke Salm Religious Education Workshop. I'm Marianne Donahue Lynch, the Associate Executive Director in the Office for Mission and Ministry for DINA. And on behalf of Brother Visitor Dennis Lee and my colleagues from the Office for Mission and Ministry, Alan Whalen and Justin Martineau, we welcome LaSallians from all over the Institute, and in particular, our speaker, Dr. Josh Packard. I would invite everyone now on our call to please make sure that you have muted yourself as we proceed. And before I formally introduce Dr. Packard, let's pause for a moment of silent prayer as we conclude these International Days for Peace, a wonderful celebration that we have had for the past month throughout our Institute. Let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God. St. John Baptist de La Salle, pray for us. Live Jesus in our hearts forever. It's my honor to welcome Dr. Josh Packard, the Executive Director of Springtide Research Institute. Dr. Packard is an accomplished researcher and academic with expertise in sociology of religion and new forms of religious expression. A talented speaker and writer, Josh has been a guest on numerous radio shows and podcasts, including Minnesota Public Radio, Newsworthy, and others. And he has been an invited speaker at many conferences, events, and workshops. He has been published widely in both academic and popular outlets, including Christianity Today, the Huffington Post, Desert News, and the Christian Science Monitor, among others. Tonight, he will speak to us on the topic of isolation, inclusion, and relational authority, and share with us the newly released research from Springtide on the state of religion and young people 2020. We're honored to have you with us, Dr. Packard. Welcome to our gathering here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's odd, of course, not to be with you all in person, but I am doing this presentation in my slippers. So I guess there's something to be said for doing these things virtually. I'm excited to be here. We just released the State of Religion and Young People 2020 yesterday, was the official release date for it. So I'm going to be referring to it. I'm going to show you some screenshots of it, of the pages here, but just to know that you can get it on our website. And we're excited to share this research with the world, and know that this is going to be a big part of what we do at Springtide every single year. Is it'll have a new focus, but we'll be updating and tracking some key numbers that we think a lot of people just aren't paying attention to, and is actually really they're very impactful if you can understand the lives of young people as they're actually living them right now, because I think we've got some outdated understandings and ideas of young people. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to get into this. There's a chat box over there, which, get ready, because like really early on in this presentation, I'm going to ask you a question, ask you to weigh in. And I'm super excited. A lot of this data and things that I'm going to be sharing with you is US centric. So I'm very curious here about how our Filipino friends will do. Everybody, can you see my screen right now? And can you see the screen that looks like a PowerPoint presentation? Okay, good. So we're off to a roaring start here. Just to give you a quick overview of what we do at Springtide, we believe that no young person should have to navigate life's most important questions alone. So we conduct actionable research to reflect the inner and outer lives of 13 to 25-year-olds in order to help those who care about young people to care better. That is the core of what we do. We collect data, we disseminate the data, and we start conversation around it and try and put that stuff into action. Mostly what we do at Springtide is that we sort of bring this behavioral and social science lens to bear to help understand the lives of young people in the most accurate way possible, so that religious leaders like yourselves can leverage the best of your theological training to reach young people in ways that truly transform hearts and minds. So we're going to stay right in our lane, meaning that I have no inclination to try and tell you about accompaniment or the sacraments or any of the things that you all know so much about. But I do think that we have an understanding to bring here that can help you to do that work even better than you're already doing it. We've got Brother Ernest Miller here is on the call. I see he's one of our research advisory board members at Springtide, so I'm glad to see that. And we come out of the Lasallian Education and Research Initiative, which is an organization that also houses St. Mary's Press here in the United States. So this data that I'm going to be talking about today it comes out of a full year of work that we've been doing at Springtide. So over 10,000 surveys, 150 interviews. And I think that the findings are pretty clear out of this, that the religious lives of young people are more complex and complicated than they've ever been. That we need something other than just these traditional sort of checked boxes to help us really understand what's going on with them and how we can reach them, and how we can be an effective mentor. Because young people tell us time and again that what they really need are trusted adults in their lives. And it's a weird thing because I think sometimes we don't always get the sort of maybe we don't get the impression from young people that that's what they want, but what they tell us when you actually sit down with them and have a chance to sort of pry into their lives a little bit, what they consistently tell us is that is in fact what they need and what they're looking for. And so we present all of this in this report. I want to give you a couple of page views here. So this is what the inside of the report looks like. We've got tide turning tips, some of which I'll share later in this presentation. And throughout the report, if you're on iBooks, right, if you're on an iOS device and you have access to iBooks, you can download it right now for free. You can go to Apple Books and download The State of Religion Young People. Thanks to a very generous donation from a family foundation. The report is free in digital form and it's only $10 in print. But the digital form is really cool because on these pages where you can see sort of here in the margins that we've got links to podcasts and quotes, and we've got data, there's blogs and interviews. You can click right there. It's a big file in Apple Books, but you can click right there and you can watch the video, you can hear the podcast, you can dive deeper into the data for each of these things. So it becomes this interactive look at the lives of young people in the United States in 2020 in this pretty immersive way that we don't always have the privilege of understanding from this big picture view, because we're so obviously immersed in our day-to-day lives with the young people that we serve. And another way that we've done that I want to bring to attention here is through our podcast. It's called The Voices of Young People. And every time we release a report, you can see some in the background behind me, belonging and meaning making as well. We also do a season of the podcast. And season 3 of the podcast is all about hearing from young people in their own words about how their faith lives intersect with their daily lives, how their beliefs influence their decisions and their behaviors, what they want to do with their lives, and how they got to where they are. So we've taken the interviewer completely out of the equation. There's just a little introduction by me, and you get to hear directly from them about how they experience or don't experience, in some cases, God or faith or tradition or religion or any of those things. It's incredibly compelling. We've got a wide spectrum of young people here, incredibly diverse group of young people. Also pertinent to this audience, I'll just say one more thing about the state of religion and young people, which is that we were just contacted and then awarded a grant to follow up on this project, this is all 10,000 data points and 150 interviews to just carve out and write a Catholic edition of the State of Religion and Young People 2020. So that'll come out in January, I think is the release date, but that we're working on it right now. So stay tuned later in the winter for a more Catholic specific one, but where we can dive a little bit deeper into the connections between what young people are telling us and, say, accompaniment, as the Pope has been so strong in calling for over the last few years. We'll have different profiles and things in there. So I think you all will find that to be very compelling. So we've got all this stuff that we're drawing on, but we need to start with a framing question. So here's where the chat comes in, and it's Marion mentioned that I'm a professor. So this is sort of a quiz. We'll see who can get the right answer. You ready? All right. Religion in America, dying or thriving? So put your answer in the chat. If you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about, why you answered the way that you did. So do you think that religion in this country is dying or thriving? And then what sort of gives you that impression? I can't play the Jeopardy theme music, but we'll just sort of hang out for a second. Connor says religion is dying, spirituality is thriving. That's an interesting take. I think my students would largely agree that those are not the same things. Anna says that it's thriving. Justin says both. Highly religious people are more animated than ever, which actually turns off many younger people, millennials and Gen Zs. Very nuanced understanding of what is going on. I mean, I think that is certainly, of course, here there's this, it's almost impossible to understand the current season of politics that we're in without understanding it through a religious lens. And I think there's a lot of truth to what Justin is saying there. Grace says that it's thriving. See if we can get a few more people on the record. This is what I love about the chat box. Like, you can't take it back. You can't, if we're in a conference room, you'd be like, oh no, I wrote down the other one. Dying or thriving? Dying. Pandemic has diminished an active participation of community. Walt, thank you for that. That's very true. We're going to talk about the pandemic and what's going on. I think that's, boy, it just doesn't show any signs of slowing down here. I think thriving because people are searching for something to make sense of what's happening. Thriving, but in so many ways, religion in America is evolving. From Macy. Anna says, the fact that it's still there means it's thriving with many creative ways of making it thrive. So I love this, Anna. That's part of what drew me into this study from a sociology standpoint, is that they're, not only my own religious background, but the idea that it would be important for society to think about religion as like, there's something really durable about religion. It must be important, right? Okay. So as Marion mentioned, this is my job. I'm a sociologist of religion. So I'm going to present to you some trends, and then we will see, who was right. I'm not just going to give it away. All right. How important would you say religion is in your own life? We've been tracking this number for a long time. I just pulled the data back from 1993. This is from Gallup. Sorry, it seems like the citation went away there. So you've got the blue line at the top that says it's very important, and then orange, fairly important, not very important, in no opinion. So what you can see here is that in 1993, we were about 60% of people saying that it was very important. And by the time we get to 2018, we are somewhere just north of 50%. So, we've got some fluctuation there. Certainly that's coming at the rise of not very important. Okay, so that's the one that's had the increase from like 11 to 25% or something. So there does seem to be some shifting sands there. But on the whole, like, we've still got something close to 85% of people. I'm sorry, we've got 75 to 80% of people at various times telling us that religion is very important or fairly important in their lives. That's a fairly sizable majority of the country. And while there's certainly some change there, it has not fallen off a cliff. All right, so let's take a look. That one seems not wholly conclusive on its own. So then let's look at this. Do you believe in God? It looks like all my citations went away. This one's from Gallup. We trace this one back to 1944, where 96% of people said yes, they believed in God. Then it goes up to 98, and then settles in 2017 at 87%. I don't understand the third column, the 2% of people who have no opinion about the existence of God at all, which seems like something you might think about from time to time. I don't know. So anyway, in a decline here, but certainly some other fluctuations. We go up and down a little bit, and nothing again that's alarmingly low. 87% wouldn't cause you to go into crisis mode. I love this chart here. It's incredibly complicated. I'll explain it to you. I'm not going to ask you to try and figure it out. So on the horizontal axis on the bottom, what we've got there is per capita income. And the vertical one is the percentage of people that pray daily by country. So you see the normal curve there. And of course, the really key thing to note is how weird the United States is relative to our international comparisons. So the United States way off over here on the right-hand side, marked and called out there. Of the 102 companies, the US is the only one with both above average GDP per capita and above average frequency of daily prayer. Usually what happens is that as you get wealthier, you get less prayerful. That's a whole other dissertation. We won't get into exactly why that is, but it's important to note that the United States is strange here. And what happens is that if you break out the United States by different demographic groups, what you find is that there's not a United States, especially on this kind of a metric, but there's lots of United States. Is that a word? Lots of versions of the United States. And then we start to see a curve internally inside the US that looks much more like this international curve. But this definitely does speak to the culture of the world that we live in. So we've got, some declining rates of some things. We've got stable or still high rates of prayer relative to what you would predict or expect based on our income levels. But the trend that most of you are probably super familiar with is what's called the rise of the unaffiliated. Right? This is when we ask people on a survey, are you Catholic, Jewish, Buddhist, Protestant, etc.? There's that last little box that says none. So how many people are checking that box that says none? Those are the people that we call unaffiliated. And this has been steadily increasing. This is the one that Pew has made such a big deal out of over the last 10 years. It's important to make a big deal out of. Gallup is also tracking it. These numbers are from the General Social Survey, which is a big sociological study that's put out every 2 years in the US. The actual number at the end doesn't super matter as much as the trend, which all the places that are tracking it see the same trend, which is that it's increasing. And here you see the breakdown by age. 18 to 34, 35 to 49, 50 to 64, and 65 plus, they're all on the rise, with younger people driving that even more so. At Springtide, all of our research focuses on 13 to 25-year-olds. So we think it's worth the extra time and effort and money and resources to go all the way down to 13, because that's the age that a lot of young people start getting the freedom to make some of their first religious decisions, right? It's also the age of rites of passage in a lot of religious traditions, confirmations, bar mitzvahs, that kind of stuff. And when we track this number, we see that for 13 to 25-year-olds, it's even a touch higher. So 40% nearly of 13 to 25-year-olds are claiming no affiliation. That doesn't fit in super well with this picture that we've been painting where, we've got, such a high percentage of the country that believes in God, and we've got all these people who pray more than you would expect them to, et cetera, et cetera. So is religion dying or thriving? Well, I don't know. I actually have no idea, and I'm the one who's supposed to know. And I think that there's all kinds of good reasons why we don't know this. Your comments here highlight the complexity of that as you all were explaining why you voted dying or thriving. So everybody wins. Everybody gets a blue ribbon for that answer. Good job. And I think, though, that part of the reason why we can't say for sure and why the data at this macro level is so contradictory is because the world has been changing significantly, but not necessarily in the ways that we always think. And so I want to share with you tonight some of the ways that the world has been changing that causes all of these contradictions and how in particular that impacts young people. Nancy Ammerman, who's a professor, I think she's emeritus now, professor of sociology of religion rather at Boston University. She said, in a time of significant, she wrote this for Sacred Stories and Spiritual Tribes, which is a fantastic book a few years ago, looking at the complexity of people's faith lives in all domains. She said, in a time of significant change, we cannot assume that we will find religion in the predictable places or in the predictable forms. And if we do not find as much of it in those predictable places as we did before, we cannot assume that it is disappearing. So part of what happens with that affiliation and unaffiliation thing that raises so many alarm bells is that we look at that and we see that rising and people go, oh my goodness, this is a world without faith. But when you look at the other indicators, we get this different picture, which is that faith may be fluctuating and indicators of religiosity may be up in the air and changing, but it certainly doesn't paint a picture of one that is faithless or religionless. In fact, she goes on to write, we are only just now coming to terms with the fact that more and more religion happens outside of traditional institutions. She was writing this about 6-7 years ago. That trend, I want to argue and share with you tonight, that I think has only been accelerated. Before we get there, though, I'm going to ask you one more question. It's an easy one. All you have to do is either give the thumbs up if you know how to do that on Zoom, or you can drop your answer into chat, or you can just raise your hand. Are you a good friend? Well, yeah, look, who's a good friend? I'm a good friend. Everybody? Justin says, Justin gives, oh, come on, Justin, you don't know? Yes, I hope so. Good. Look, we all think we're good friends. I think most of us do, right? All right, second question, follow up to that. And then I'm going to explain to you who this guy is, looking at you skeptically about your answer about, yes, you're a good friend. Have you ever behaved poorly towards one of your friends? Talked behind their back, maybe not been as kind to them as you should have been. Yeah. I mean, the thumbs up isn't like you enjoyed it. If you give the thumbs up icon here, it's just that, yes, you have. You've done this. I've done this. And so I wouldn't that make you a bad friend? I mean, on the one hand, you all just said that you're good friends, but then you're now telling me that you do terrible things to your friends, or at least you have in the past. How do we reconcile that? I ask my students a version of the same question. To have a friend is to forgive. That's a good reminder, sister. I asked and Walt says human beings are not perfect. Good. Yep. Yeah, this is the truth, right? Just because you've done something poorly in the past doesn't mean that you are in general not a good friend. The version of this question I often ask my students in addition to this one is about whether or not I was a good student. So I went to college, obviously. I did well enough in college to go to graduate school, got a PhD in sociology, got a job as a professor. And they would be like, oh, sure, Dr. Packard, like you're definitely, you're a good student. And I was like, really? Because there were definitely times that I, stayed out too late and purposefully sort of didn't study for an exam as much as I needed to and failed it. And they're like, oh, but that doesn't make you a bad student. That just means that you didn't do well in that exam. It's the same thing as that time that I treated my friend poorly. And I was like, okay, so what then would make me a bad student? Like if I had sort of slacked off every day of my life, but still somehow managed to end up with a PhD, am I a good student or not? And we would have this long discussion about that, or about being a good friend, about what is the tipping point? Like, how do we draw a boundary about what counts as being a good friend? And when do you sort of move into that other space where you're not a good friend, you're a bad friend? And it gets into this really messy and complicated discussion. And it's really hard to draw those boundaries. But I think that's largely the discussion that we've been having about young people and faith in America over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. A version of that discussion is what we've been having. We've been having this discussion about young people and their faith lives where we want to figure out, like, are they affiliated or are they unaffiliated? Are they religious or are they not religious? Are they believers, to use evangelical terminology? But what does that mean? Does that mean that, if you don't sign on for the whole kit and caboodle, that you're not signing on at all? It's a version of the same kind of problem that Howard Becker, this guy, that's his name, he's a sociologist, first put to us to help us understand how we should be thinking. And he says, instead of thinking about whether or not you are or are not a good friend, you should be thinking about the circumstances that would cause you, a person who otherwise thinks of yourself as a good friend, to behave poorly toward a friend of yours, or me, a person who is otherwise a good student, to not study for a test. That information about the circumstances that would cause me to do something or act out of character or behave in a certain way, that is actually not only interesting, but really useful, because then we can understand how to shape those circumstances for those people. At Springtide, this is sort of our internal mantra. I'm always telling our team, I know we do research, but we never want to be just interesting. We always want to be useful. And this is one of the ways that we do that. Howard Becker reminds us that there are types of activities, not types of people. And I think we've gotten into the habit of thinking about types of people far too much, especially when it comes to young people. Here's what I mean, that we are having the wrong conversation in this world. And we're having it in large part because it's a conversation that used to make sense, but doesn't anymore. And it's a conversation that's largely driven out of an understanding of the world around us. It used to be that the world was pretty simple. And I mean, used to be meaning like not that long ago, maybe my parents' generation, my grandparents at most, that there were these major social institutions that governed and guided and shaped our lives. There were, schools that we were proud to affiliate with, and there were churches and religious bodies that we associated with and attended regularly. I couldn't find an icon for social clubs, so I just borrowed this club from a playing card. But there were Kiwanis clubs, and there were BFWs, and all kinds of things that people associated with and wanted to be known that they belonged there. There were workplaces that people were proud to sort of wear the badge of. My grandfather worked at creameries in northern Minnesota and for Land O'Lakes, and wore a gold watch with the Land O'Lakes logo on the watch. It's one of my most distinct memories of him. And these institutions, it wasn't just that they existed out in the world around us. They existed in us. They were the way that people largely structured their identities, was through their affiliation with those institutions. It's because we trusted those institutions. And that was a very unique kind of world. And in order to reach somebody in that world, especially a young person, you needed those institutional affiliations. In this world, all we have to do is align ourselves with one of those institutions or a combination of them. And we automatically have authority over the people who identify with that institution. We get some influence in their lives. If you have a credential or a title with a religious institution, and a young person got a role to play there, and a young person attends that, then you just automatically have some purchase into their lives. My dad once told me when I was asking him who could get him to make a major life change, if there was one that he needed to make, if he was engaged in some sort of behavior that he shouldn't be. And he said he thought about it for a long time, and he's Catholic. And he said, well, I guess you, or Kathy, his wife. And I said, well, that's very nice. But not you go to church on a regular basis, no matter where you are in the country. You go to mass, not your priest. And he's like, oh, no. I mean, I guess when I was younger, when I was a kid, the priest. And I said, that's interesting. I don't remember you talking about an influential priest in your life ever. And he goes, oh, no. I don't mean a priest. I mean the priest. Like whoever the priest was, if they had told me that I was supposed to be doing something or supposed to not be doing something, I probably would have listened. Which I think, speaks to that role, right? Of like whoever the priest is. I shared this conversation with my class. I was teaching the sociology of religion, and I shared that conversation with my class, and it's not that they agreed or disagreed with my dad. They had no way of processing that. It didn't make any sense to them that somebody would have authority or influence over their lives just because of a particular role that they held. And I was like, I know it doesn't make sense to you. You don't automatically listen to me just because I'm your professor, even though I think you should. But that's another story, right? But we don't live in that world anymore where we automatically trust those institutions. And I'm not saying that we don't live in that world anymore just because that's the sense that I get. The data are really clear about this. So here, Pew and Gallup and others track this for adults, and we can see this trend over the last 30 or 40 years for adults. But at Springtide, we look just at young people. And here's how young people rate their levels of trust in various social institutions on this scale. So we see nonprofits come out on top, banks, and of course, the one that is sort of going to jump out to you most is right here at organized religion, right in the middle at a 4.9. But remember, this is 4.9. You might think okay, they're not doing too bad. They're not too far off from the top, but this is a 10-point scale. So the story here isn't that organized religion is at a 4.9. The story here is that no institution is doing particularly well because the world has changed. The story here is that there's been an erosion of trust in all institutions. That is the massive shift that we've been living through for the last 20 or 30 years. And so the efforts that we've been making, really well-intentioned and important and like good meaning efforts to reach young people and be transformative figures in their lives, we keep digging into this world based on implied and inherent and automatic institutional trust. So often we've built programs that rely on that automatic trust. It's not that they don't work at all. It's just that they're way less effective than they used to be, because the world now is just a shadow of the world where those things were highly effective. In fact, 83% of young people say they are more likely to take advice from someone who cares about them. And 32% say that the job titles do not matter to them, like, at all. Again, as somebody who has a PhD, this is really disappointing. 14% say that if someone has an impressive job title, they do not trust them. 14% is not a massive number, but it's not nothing either to say that the job title automatically turns them off. We heard this again and again in our interviews too, and some of those quotes I'll share with you later. But this is the story of this eroding trust in institutions fundamentally changes the way that we need to approach young people. So the world is changing. It's not only, I mean, at a basic level, it's not just a few dominant institutions, but we've got all of these other institutions in people's lives now that they think of themselves as global citizens. There's online communities and games and things like this. There's social networks that matter. Sports have taken on and on and on and on. I didn't try and capture all of them here, but just to paint the point that there's a lot of complexity in people's lives competing for their affinities and their affiliations. And what happens in this world? Well, in this world, I mean, we don't construct our identities by like the ways that those things live inside of us. We construct our identities in this world by sort of like, oh, a little piece of this and a little piece of that and a little piece of this, but there's no big centralizing force. We don't fully align ourselves with any of those institutions. We pick bits and pieces of them because nobody wants to completely align themselves with an institution or organization that they don't fully and completely trust, but they have to participate in them to some extent. So in this world, the more you align yourself with an institution, the less authority you have in the life of a person. If they think that you're representing the organization or the institution, they're disinclined to trust you automatically. You have less authority and influence over them automatically. So we can see this story playing out very clearly when we look at even those traditional categories of affiliation and disaffiliation. That's a big part of the story that we tell in the State of Religion in Young People 2020. I want to share some of that here. All right. So if we look at just the young people out of the 10,000 surveys that we did, we look at just the young people who tell us that they're affiliated, right? We find that 52% of them say that they have little to no trust in organized religion. Again, they're checking the box to say I'm Jewish or Catholic or Christian or Protestant, whatever. And they're also on a question, I think like 4 questions later on the same survey, they're telling us that they have little to no trust in organized religion. That is not what you would expect from somebody who is telling you that they were affiliated. You would think, again, in that old world where institutional trust is high, you would say like, oh, somebody's affiliated, they must trust what we're doing and who we are and what we're about. It's not necessarily the case anymore. 20% of the young people who tell us they're affiliated with a religious tradition say that they are not actually, though, a religious person. They may come out of a family tradition that requires them to or compels them to check the box of Catholic or Jewish or Muslim, but they do not think of themselves as a religious person, or maybe they think of themselves as spiritual, but not a religious person. Nearly a third of affiliated young people told us that they do not think it's important to have a faith community, but they claim an affiliation. And again, about a third of young people tell us that they attend religious services once a year or less, but they're affiliated. And over 1 in 5 young people who tell us they are affiliated with a religious tradition also tell us that they don't try to live out their religious beliefs in their daily lives, which might make you wonder what it means to have a religious affiliation. In other words, this is a giant mess. I mean, that's the big takeaway here. This is a giant mess. When we try to use, are you a good friend? Why did you lie last week about to your friend about what you were doing with your other friend? Right? It's a giant mess. The categories don't help. Monica says, I guess if you have to put a label on it, I'm Christian, but with everything in today's world, I literally don't know. I think just spiritual, maybe. And the same story is true for the unaffiliated. 60% of unaffiliated young people say that they are at least slightly spiritual. 28% of unaffiliated young people say that they do try to live out their religious beliefs in their daily lives. Try that one on for size. About 1 in 5 of unaffiliated young people say that they attend religious gatherings at least once a month, but they won't claim a religious affiliation. And 1 in 10 young people of unaffiliated young people say that they have become more religious over the last 5 years. And nearly 40% of unaffiliated young people say that they, in fact, are religious. They will just not claim an affiliation. All right, so it's not just that the boxes don't work for affiliated, they don't work for unaffiliated either. So what does help us to understand young people's religious behaviors? Well, we think that what we're finding more and more to be the case over the year long of data, and what I think many of you probably intuitively already know and sense and feel and experience on the ground, is that this outdated notion of affiliated or unaffiliated, or even attending or unattending at religious events and services, is relationships. Who has influence in their lives? Where do they find trusted adults in their lives? And the story here is much more clear, but also sort of at times really grim. 27% of young people have one or fewer adults in their life that they can turn to if they need to talk. That includes their parents. So you've got a whole lot, a quarter to a third of young people with just one adult in their life that they could turn to, or less, sometimes zero. That's a stunningly low number. Most of the research suggests that what you really want for really healthy, pro-social, well-adjusted, to use that term from the 60s, maybe, young people is 5 adult relationships in their lives. And here you've got a third that have one. 69% of young people have 3 or fewer meaningful interactions in a regular day. This is a stunning number to me, and it came out of some, the only reason I even knew to ask the question is because at the university where I work, some campus ministers, they all got together and came to me to ask them to help run a survey of young people, students on our campus. And I run a research lab where we have a whole lot of students working in there. And I was like, oh, do you want to know how many meaningful interactions? Like, so we give them instructions in the survey question that's like, it says not just about the weather or, casual, how are you? Or, like, how are you doing? Fine, whatever. And I was like, oh, so the first category will be like 1 to 5 and then 6 to 10 or something, da, da, da. My students stopped me immediately and they're like, no, the first category has to be 0. And then the next category has to be 1. And then we can go up from there in groups. And I was like, that's crazy. We're on a college campus. It's a residential college. Like, people are living in dorms and walking to class. This is way pre-COVID. They're eating in dining halls. They have more than, there can't be anybody here who has 0. And most of them are, the vast majority are going to have way more than 1. And I said, if it's not, I was like, we'll do it. I'll put them on there because y'all are students and you know these people better. And I said, if 0 or 1 ends up in the top 3 answers, I'll buy you all coffee. So the results of the survey came back in and I was at $100 for 4 lattes at Starbucks because I was dead wrong. 0 and 1 were both in the top 3. And this is on a college campus, let alone looking at all 13 to 25-year-olds. They just, the paradox here is that they appear to be so connected, and they are connected, but the relationships are not always deep and meaningful, helping them to do the really hard work, the really important work that you all are so good at helping young people to do when you get the chance to do it. Having these, what does God want from me in my life kind of conversations. 41% of young people, however, depend on a close relationship to help them find meaning and purpose in life. So they're really important. They just don't have them as often as we think that they should be, and as the research and other research outside of Springtide suggests that they need to be. And not only are they not getting them as often, but if you think about all the research that we talked about so far, you might not be terribly surprised by this, which is that when they do get them, they're not getting them from religious leaders. So when we asked young people to name the adults that they could turn to if they needed them, they could select all that apply here. Only 8% of them chose a religious leader as somebody that they could turn to if they needed them. So these relationships are critical. We outline more of this in Belonging, but we only had 1,000 data points back then for that research. We've got 10,000 now to confirm that religious people are doing a whole lot of work. I don't think anybody on this call or any other religious leader that I've talked to over the last year is sitting around with nothing to do. But it's not always necessarily the work that is the most impactful for young people in this new kind of reality. And a lot of times that's because you're not given the permission to do it, because maybe the people that are in charge of you don't understand this, haven't seen this research just yet. And now this is critical, and even more so in the time of COVID. These relationships are absolutely essential because, fundamentally, our brains are wired to be social. We are not intended to be solitary creatures. That's a reason why there's a whole field like sociology, which is a study of group behavior, is because people can't survive on their own for very long. And yet increasingly, that's where young people find them. So what happens to young people when they're alone? Well, it's kind of, it's dramatically concerning. What happens in their brains is that we get this response in our brains when we are isolated and alone and left out. Even the perception of being isolated and alone or left out, even if you just think that people are leaving you out of something, that is processed neurologically in your brain the same way that physical pain is processed in your brain. It's being left out or being alone is the same to your brain as like dropping a hammer on your toe. That is, or like, have you ever had that experience where you hold your hand over too close to or you pick up a pot or something that's been on the stove, and then you're like, oh, that is actually a lot warmer than I think. Or you hold your hand too close to a candle or some wax drips on it. I actually find this to be like a really, like a visceral sensation for Christmas Eve services, a little bit of that wax dripping down to your hand. But if it does it too much, or if you hold your hand on that candle for too long, of course you get this immediate and instinctive response that you pull away. And why do we have a pain response like that? Well, I think most of us can pretty much understand why we would do that. Is because, of course, if we leave our hand there on the stove or on the candle for too long, we're going to hurt ourselves. This is self-preservation. So I think it's worth asking ourselves, like, why does the brain process isolation and exclusion in the same way that it processes holding on to a pot for too long? Why have we evolved to this point? What is the utility to us as humans for experiencing social exclusion as a form of pain? And the people who study this, it takes them back to this notion of why do we have any pain? Well, this pain is a protective mechanism. And that's largely what's going on with the feeling of pain from social exclusion as well. We are such social creatures. I know it's trite, and when I said it, you're like, yeah, of course, that's a cliche. But we are such social creatures that it's so important for our survival and our ability to thrive that we've actually developed a biological, neurological, dramatic and instant sort of pain response to being left out or being alone for a prolonged basis, to remind us that, like, hey, this is not sustainable. We can't do this. You're about to really hurt yourself if you keep going down this path. And so the sense of pain is meant to guide us back towards something that's sustainable. It is a protective mechanism that pushes us back toward other people and relationships. Now, for a long period of time, maybe the entirety of human history up until, say, 2015, this wasn't that hard to do. In fact, it was harder to be alone than it was to be together, because the consequences of isolation were often literal starvation in many cases, but certainly putting you at risk of your very survival. This notion that things weren't right or that we felt lonely, that was about all that we needed to push us back towards the group. These are the coping mechanisms that we had to like instinctively push us back to the group. But what's so weird about 2020, especially with COVID, in this odd context, emergence of events where we're disconnected from institutions already, and now we're physically, in many cases, and socially isolated from others, even just casually. We have the technology to actually dig further into this. We can just retreat. So in the midst of the pain that we feel from isolation and loneliness, we can actually choose to exclude ourselves further. We can live alone even though we are not designed or intended to. So in response to this, what social scientists have been documenting is this effect of what's called network closure, that the idea that others might not accept me, might not even listen to me, might not invite me into their group has happened and has caused this pain response. So my response then is that I'm actually going to draw my network, the people that I let in closely to me, even tighter and tighter and tighter, not realizing necessarily that sort of is detrimental to my long-term success and survival. So the way this shows up in the real world, of course, is that there's a whole lot of yous on one side of a wall, well-intending adults who really want to have an influence in the life of young people and trying to do it in the right way. Feeling like young people don't want anything to do with you sometimes, or won't always listen to you, or just are not reaching out. And you've got a whole bunch of young people on the other side of that wall who are saying, I've been rejected so many times and it's so painful and it hurts so much that, you know what, we're just going to hang out over here. I'm going to keep my relationship surface. I can do this on social media in a mediated environment where I don't have to disclose anything that I don't want to disclose. And if I do, I can just block or mute somebody. And it seems like an impassable wall. This kind of retreatism has some very detrimental effects that have been well documented. So Cigna is a big health provider here in the United States. This study is of all adults. We see this at the broadest level. 50% of Americans feeling sometimes or always alone. 1 in 4 feeling like they rarely or never feel as though there are people who understand them. And for the first time ever, Cigna documenting that Gen Z is the youngest generation, rather, is the loneliest generation. Usually the loneliest generation is the oldest generation, for reasons that you can probably understand if you think about it for a second. What we found at Springtide, extending this all the way down to 13, was more confirmation of this. That again, that 3 or fewer meaningful interactions on a typical day, but also that young people who experience isolation and loneliness are 3.5 times more likely to be severely stressed. So they're doing this at a time when they're isolated and alone and retreating at a time when they're at their most vulnerable. Cigna also found that the long-term health impacts here are massive. And Mushtaq et al. A while ago, summarizing all the research about isolation and loneliness, shows a consistent link between isolation, loneliness, and mental health, including depression, suicide, and suicidal ideation. These are inherently spiritual concerns, so much so that Varun Soni, who is the Dean of Religious Life at the University of Southern California, was writing an op-ed in the LA Times last year. And he says, whereas students used to ask, how should I live? They are now more likely to ask, why should I live? Where they used to talk about hope and meaning, now they grapple with hopelessness and meaninglessness. I never got the question in my first 5 years at USC that I now get almost daily from students. How do I make friends? Students may have thousands of friends online, but few in real life. They may be experts at talking with their thumbs, but not so much with their tongues. And as a result, they may feel as if they don't have a tribe or a sense of belonging. They feel disconnected from what it means to be human. And I would imagine that helping young people navigate what it means to be human and why should they live, those got to be the kind of questions that get you really excited I mean, those are the kind of conversations that I really like having with young people, and gives a lot of purpose and meaning. And I don't even have the kinds of jobs that you all have, the kinds of roles where, that I imagine drew you into the kind of work that you're doing. So these questions are inherently spiritual. This situation is absolutely vital to being able to connect with young people. Megan, a 24-year-old in our study, said, "Nobody cares. Nobody is really listening." She's connecting these two things, care and listening. And this takes us back to the oldest lesson, actually, in my field, in sociology. The very first sociologists who ever was to study, groups of people, actually chose to focus on religious groups of people, and came out of that study in the late 1800s saying, the way that you get people to believe is that they first have to belong. Belonging precedes believing. So if we don't get young people connected, if they're walking around isolated and alone, very few meaningful interactions, it's not just that their physical health is impacted as though they were smoking, which is obviously troubling enough in its own way, but it's that we can never get them to a really durable, long-term sense of belief if they don't first feel like they belong. That's true of people in general. It's even more true of young people. So again, 13 to 25-year-olds, right? Their lives are like bananas a lot of the time. What they say today is not necessarily how they'll feel tomorrow. And sometimes like the biggest thing and most important issue that they're facing is their algebra test at the end of the week. And other times it's actual real stuff, like the kid at the place where my wife works, whose mom put him in the back seat and took him on a drive-by to try and kill his dad and her ex-boyfriend. Kids are resilient, but their lives are tumultuous. A sense of belief, what they said on a Tuesday about, that they subscribe to a particular set of beliefs, that's not going to carry them through all that tumultuousness the same way that a sense of belonging will. Because if they have that sense of belonging, they may lose track for a while, for a period of time, about what they believe in, what you're hoping to get them to believe in, but they won't lose track of you and the way that you make them feel. They won't lose track of the group of people that made them feel special in life. So we can make little short-term headway in this notion. When we put believing first, we see these immediate short-term results. We can get young people really convicted, especially they'll get on fire for something. But even today at 42, sometimes I get really excited about a new hobby or something. And then 3 months later, I'm like, oh yeah, remember that minute back in the day when I was going to knit hats or scarves or something? I don't do that anymore, right? And I'm not saying that religion is a hobby, but I'm 42 and I can make the distinction at 14, 15, 16 years old. I think we see a lot of those same patterns. Establishing that connection, that sense of belonging will carry through all of those bumps. And it can be harder to do sometimes because the immediate progress is not as quick, but it's much more durable. What we need to do then is establish this notion of what the data tell us here is best summed up in this phrase, relational authority. We've got all these institutions in people's lives. They don't live in people's hearts the way that they used to. We need to replace those institutions with actual, real, identifiable people. Because what young people confirm to us time and time again is that those people do live in their hearts. That is what carries them through. That is what keeps them connected and coming back over and over again. So gone are the days when, a letter jacket and an affiliation with an educational institution or a gold watch because of the organization that you work with, like my grandfather, is a symbolic and signifying of who you are and where your identity is. Instead, we've emerged into this reality where the individual people that shape my life are the ones that I carry around with me. That is how I know who I am. So how do we do that? How do we do this relational authority? Well, it's a new model for this new reality. It combines some things that we already have and know at work into one a coherent thing. So you see here, it's a solidarity of sameness and solidarity of difference. And what we want to do then is sort of mesh together two worlds where, on the one hand, we've got this solidarity of sameness world. In big sociological terms, this was the pre-industrial world. Everybody basically had the same job. We all trusted each other, or knew we couldn't trust anyway, because like our solidarity, our sense of trust came from the fact that we all lived essentially the same reality. The bad weather that affected you affected me. The solutions that you employed to try and deal with that are the same ones that I am. That's exactly right, Macy. This is the gold star. I don't ever say Durkheim's concept of solidarity because most people sort of close their eyes when I start talking about Durkheim, but you get the gold star here. Post-industrial era, I should just let Macy describe it. When we get into the modern world, that is, of course, not what happens. Like, we don't live most of us don't even know what our neighbors do for a living, let alone are we living the same realities. Our jobs are now completely divided up. We have dentists who take care of teeth, and we have teachers who teach, and we have politicians who, well, I don't know what politicians do most of the time, but we've got people who have distinct roles to play in our lives. And the way that you get one of those roles is not by raising your hand to say how much you want it. You get one of those roles by getting a credential. The institutions give you the power to have those roles. But of course, the institutions just don't matter. We've already seen that earlier in the data. They don't matter like they used to. But I'm not advocating that we go back to this other world where the authority that came out of the solidarity of sameness was based on some tradition. There's all kinds of biases inherent in that young people also don't like. Instead, what we need to do is bring these things together into a world of relational authority. Let me explain to you what those dimensions are, and it'll make more sense. The first one is listening. That is one of the first components for how we begin to establish our relational authority. Transparency, number 2. We're going to go through each of these in turn here in just a second. Integrity, 3. Care, number 4. But again, I told you that this isn't a world, where we're just asking for people who understand my felt experience and lived realities. We still do want dentists who are really highly skilled and trained and credentialed to be the people working on my teeth. We need faith leaders who are trained and credentialed, who are experts in their field, to be answering and dealing and guiding me through my existential questions and my beliefs. And so expertise is absolutely a critical component of this. Young people told us time and time again that they are not looking for adults to be their friends. They have enough friendship stuff going on in their lives. They want adults who are experts, but that expertise has to come with these other dimensions if you really want to make an impact. 65% of young people agreed with the statement that a person's expertise does not matter if they don't care about me. This is one of the issues that is facing professors and teachers who are doing online education right now more than ever, is that behind a screen, it's just that much harder while they're lecturing or giving content or trying to teach, division or whatever it is. It's harder to be able to convey how much they care about the young people that they're teaching. And so they're sort of just relying on their expertise to carry them through. But this is also very real, that it's like, I'm not even sure that I can hear you teaching me about math expert person, if I don't think that you care deeply about how math impacts my life and what I want to do with my life, or even just me as a person. It's a lot harder to do behind a screen, but it's obviously critical. In a religious context, Alex told us, the reason I stayed at my church is because of my mentor. She's very hospitable, very loving, very forgiving, non-judgmental, and has been so gracious. And I think this is a very nice statement that Alex gives. But notice what Alex is not saying. Alex did not say, the reason I stayed at my church is because of my priest. The homilies were amazing. The deep knowledge of, the catechism was compelling enough for me to keep coming back week after week. Gave me so much to think about. No, what Alex is telling us is a story about care. And this is a story that we heard over and over again in the interviews. That sense of belonging, that commitment, that care, ultimately, would lay the foundation so that you got to be the expert at some point. But it is not the thing that lives in the hearts of young people. So how do we do these things? Well, a little bit of data here. I'm watching the time, and I want to leave some time for questions if people have them. But I do want to share some of these data points as well as along with the tide turning tips. So 84% of young people say they will trust someone who remembers things they shared. That's a very actionable point. Simply demonstrating that you remembered something about their lives that they have shared goes a long way. They will trust someone who takes the time to hear what they have to say. I know that it can feel like you're doing nothing to just sit and listen, because we are experts. We know so much. It's really, really hard to sit with a young person who's engaged in destructive behavior and to just listen to them talk about the destructive behavior. You want to fix it. You want to change it. You want to tell them what to do because you know what's better. And you're not wrong. Like, I'm not sitting here telling you that your version of the life that you would have them live is a worse one. It's definitely the better one. But you're not doing nothing by sitting and listening. You're doing something absolutely vital in that young person's life, where so many times adults do not even hear them, let alone listen to them. 78% of young people say that they feel listened to when people show they understand, so that they understand what they've been through. And you can do that in many ways by sharing some of your own life, for example. And we'll talk about that more with transparency. 80% say they feel listened to when people show that they care about them. All right, so how do we do this? Well, communication researchers have, this is just one tip I wanted to share tonight about how to do listening. You can show sincere curiosity, often through your body language, by turning toward the person you're speaking with and nodding along to show that you're following what they're saying. Communication researchers refer to this as having an open posture, as opposed to a closed off posture with your arms folded. Ask a few questions before offering comment or advice. And this can be as simple. I know sometimes it's very nice to have like very clear, immediate action, concrete action items. Can you tell me more about that experience or person or idea that they're talking about? The tell me more question, like it's great. You don't actually have to know anything that they're talking about. My son is playing this video game. I do not understand, but I can connect with him, I know, at any time by just saying, hey, can you tell me more about X? And I promise you he will. Well, I mean, that's partially because my son very rarely stops talking, but that's, again, for a different time and day. So it's nice to have that trick in your back pocket. The other thing that communication researchers study body language have shown is that when somebody thinks that they know what they want to say, they immediately go into closed off posture. So you might think to yourself like, well, I would never cross my arms and fold my legs when a young person is talking. I can be conscious of that. But what happens is that when we think we know what we want to say next, we subtly start trying to signal to them, because we've been in enough of these situations to know that it'll work. So we start like leaning back and we'll do this. And that will signal subconsciously to the young person that's on the other side of that they're like, oh, my time is done talking, because I know some social norms, at least, even at 13 years old. And then it gives you the chance to start talking. So try and hold out from being in that posture, that physical posture, for too long. Now, on the other hand, if you've got somebody in the supermarket that won't leave you alone, keeps talking to you, or a boss who just keeps jabbering away in your office, you can use that as like a little trick in your favor. Just lean back and cross your arms, and that'll signal to them their turn to stop talking, move on, hopefully. I don't know. We've all been in those situations where nothing seems to work, right? All right, transparency. 79% of young people say they trust someone who shares things about their own life, even if those things are not always, and sometimes especially if the things that you're sharing are not the most flattering things. I know that personally, I gain a lot of purchase with my students when I share things that like just were not super great about my life. But because you are a version of success, and so implicitly you're saying like, you're not a screw up. People make mistakes and can screw up and not ultimately be a screw up, as young people have a hard time distinguishing those two things. 80% trust those who understand their lived experience. And there are some of these divides I'm going to tell you right now. There are some things that you can't solve with transparency, especially around race and discrimination, around LGBTQ issues, if that's not a way that you identify. So like, I'm not saying that you should try and, essentialize their experiences. I was in a diversity training last week when somebody said that you might not be able to see it on Zoom, but I'm only 5'2", so I get discriminated a lot because I'm short. And it was like, yeah, that's not the same thing as being Black or brown in the United States. That is not the same kind of experience. So I'm not suggesting that you need to work to find a point of commonality that way. If it doesn't exist, don't share it. You can default back to listening and care. But if you do have a way of doing that, you should consider it. Tide turning tip here. People want to know you, not just the institution you represent or the goals and purpose that drive that institution. Sharing personally about the things that matter to you. A friendship that means a lot, the type of music you love, your favorite thing to read. These things add human details to any interaction. In the social sciences, we call this a norm of reciprocity. It establishes an expectation that they can share with you because you're sharing with them. Norms of reciprocity work in a lot of ways in a lot of different contexts. If somebody lends you $1, you feel compelled the next time they need $1 to lend them $1 back, even if it wasn't like written out in a contract, right? This is just the norm. But it works in this way of sharing information and trust building as well. So when you're sharing with them and being transparent, what you're doing is also setting a tone that they should be sharing with you and transparent with you. It's incredibly effective. Again, another thing about transparency here is that when you can find those points of commonality, what you're doing is implicitly establishing you and them as a part of the same in-group. And that's critical to the extent that you can do it, because the way we think about in-group people is dramatically different than the way we think about out-group people. When somebody sees you as an out-group member, they're more likely to make stereotypes about you. They'll let past judgments color their reflections about you as a person, and your affiliations rather spill over to your identities. So this is true. Some of this first research was established in the world of racism and prejudice, but this is true for group behavior in general, as people have seen throughout the years. What happens though with in-group members is fascinating. With in-group members, we don't tend to say like, oh, that person was sleeping, as opposed to what we would do in a way to use a stereotype with out-group members, where we would say like, oh, that person is Hispanic and they're sleeping in the afternoon. That's because Hispanics are lazy. You see where that stereotype comes from? We just generalize out-group members. We see one person acting in a certain way and we generalize to all of the members of that group. With in-group members, we see somebody taking a nap in the middle of the day and like, oh, that person must be tired. They must have stayed up late last night working. We're much more forgiving of in-group members, even when they make really big mistakes. We see them as individuals, not as affiliated with these other kinds of institutions. And we dismiss stereotypes as being attacks from others. So if we start coupling all this information together, if they see you affiliated with a religious institution and they don't trust religious institutions or leaders, you're an out-group member. They're more likely to stereotype you. But if you can be transparent and you can find a point of commonality with young people, you can disrupt that pattern, establish yourself as part of their in-group, and you can have a much different kind of experience with them. Integrity. 80% of young people trust someone who admits when they're wrong. So of course we're talking about integrity, but it's a specific kind of integrity. And you see there that how integrity builds trust among 13 to 17 and 18 to 25. We broke them down there just to show that like basically this is one of the most important things you can do. And it's not because you may or may not do it. It's because adults in their lives so often don't. And the institutions that adults represent so often don't, when they're wrong, admit it or correct. And that's one of the most important and key things that we can do here. How? Well, you can follow up with young people to show that you care about their needs. That's a point of integrity. So you weren't just asking them a question or listening to them in this transactional way, but you're actually remembering. Follow through with your commitments, which means that you need to make commitments that you can follow through on, and be accountable by taking responsibility for mistakes. These are key things that young people told us in the interviews to go along with the statistical data here that was important for being a person of integrity. And finally, to be authentic by admitting what you don't know. They're not going to doubt your expertise just because you don't know one thing, especially if you start coupling that with the other dimensions of relational authority and be like, you know what, I don't know that. I've always wondered it, and I've tried, multiple times to try and figure it out, but I just haven't been able to find the right book. So maybe you and I can figure it out together, right? And in that moment, you're doing, expertise and transparency and integrity. These are the four things that young people told us that integrity means a particular kind of thing, and those follow through, accountability, and authenticity are the ways that they that's what they were talking about when they were talking about integrity, which is sort of an abstract concept. Care. 87% of young people say that they trust an adult who takes time to foster relationships. So just spending time on a young person is a big way of communicating care to them. And 81% say they will trust someone that they believe cares about them. So you see not only how to do it in this very simple way, but also why it's so important, because it makes a gigantic impact. Camille tells us, I had a few very difficult experiences during my undergraduate years because of my health, which meant my relationships to teachers weren't really always a matter of advancing a career. They were a matter of making sure I was healthy and safe and all of those things. I think that's why radical empathy was so huge for me. I was coming into contact with new identities, and they were navigating space with me as a part of their support for me. So they're teachers, they're supposed to teach. They're not navigating space with you, but like good teachers know that that is part of teaching. Even, to teach your content, you at some level have to think about and deal with and express care for the life that the young person is living at that moment. And when you do so, again, because it's in such short supply for most of the adults that they come into contact with, it has this transformative effect. She used those terms, radical empathy, which is just such a lovely phrase, and not one that you would often expect a 23-year-old to be using. But of course, all of this has to be, if you only do the things that we've been talking about so far, then you get stuck into this weird, like aunt role or uncle role, where it's like, yeah, they have some life experience, and it's really great that they can identify with me, but I don't know if they can fix any problems I've got, which is why we can't let go of that expertise part. That expertise part remains critical. 84% of young people say they trust someone who not only knows a lot, but uses that knowledge to help them. And so that becomes a critical component. But as I mentioned before, young people told us that they do not want you to be their friend. They want adults to be guides, mentors, coaches, teachers, not buddies. And one of the things that distinguishes those things from each other is that expertise role. So it's, maybe a pithy way of saying it. And I said this at one point to some bishops or archbishops, I can't remember, that were in the audience, from like, you've gotten to this role and this position in life, that you've got this title precisely at this moment that nobody cares about it anymore. But it doesn't mean that what it took to get there doesn't matter. It just means that that title doesn't matter. Like my diploma doesn't matter, but what I learned along the way to get that diploma certainly does matter to the young people that I work with and serve. So don't forget to be the expert that they need when it's time to do that. Because otherwise, I'm afraid that what happens is that you come off looking like you're just condoning a lot of the things, the poor decisions that in many cases that young people are making, or you come across as not really knowing anything when they have a big, crossroads in their life. So that expertise, when it's time, man, go for it, because that expertise is going to be really important. So we talked about how young people don't trust institutions. Well, what happens with this when we look at the trust levels that they have for relationships, and when adults are able to live out these 5 components of relational authority? Well, the trust levels go off the charts. You see the bottom one there is for relational authority. Overall, we rolled this up into an index. And instead of seeing something that's like halfway on a 10-point scale, we see trust levels that are like 90% for young people. So when adults in their lives do listening, transparency, integrity, care, and expertise together, we see their trust levels go tremendously higher, and obviously in the right direction. So again, relational authority, 5 dimensions. That's what the research is showing us. That's what we're advocating for as a way to make headway in the life of a young person. We've summarized that in the State of Religion and Young People, Relational Authority, and it's never been more critical than it is right now. I mean, this time of COVID, it makes doing this relationship-based connection just that much more critical. So that's what I've got for you tonight, but we're here on Zoom. I would love if you've got questions, or if we have time for questions, I'm happy to answer any about the data or Springtide or anything else. I mean, you can ask me questions about baking. I won't be able to answer them very well, but I'll certainly answer them. They just won't be any good.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. We do have time for questions. And so would you prefer that people put them into the chat and we could look at them that way?
I'm fine if either that or they can unmute and ask questions. Either way is good for me.
Great. Either way is good for me. So whatever people are comfortable with, if you would like to either unmute yourself or put a question in the chat, we can entertain that for a while.
I once said that people could even interrupt me. I mean, I say this generally that, because I've taught for so long, it's like, you can interrupt me during the middle and ask a question. I was doing this, it was at the Mennonite National Convention, I think in St. Louis a couple of years ago. Packed room, it's super hot. And right at the moment that I said that, all the power went out. And I was like, okay, some things can interrupt me. Like, I guess that would throw me off my train of thought. But questions, we're good with questions. Macy asks, well, yeah, thank you for listening. Does culture play a role in the young people's perspective in religion? I think culture absolutely plays a role here. And that's one of the battles that, it's both a battle that we're fighting and also I would think it's sort of refreshing. One of the things that people lament a lot who work in the church is that, families just don't, parents aren't bringing their kids to church like they used to. And my pushback on that is always that, well, okay, but like, if that's sort of superficial anyway, and if that's what it was taking to keep things going, then maybe it's better that we actually just sort of get down to it. Like, where are we really at in order to understand where we want to be? And for me, honestly, like, you all have, the best thing in the world. You are offering Jesus and God and eternal life. And if your answer to that is that, like, well, we can't get young people to connect to Jesus and God and eternal life if the culture is against us, well, I mean, come on. We can find innovative ways of reaching young people. That's an amazing thing to have. Apple can put iPhones in people's hands and they're just sort of okay. I think we can get young people and fight against the culture, but it does make it a bit more of a challenge for sure. Let's see here. We've got, oh yeah, you got my stuff. We're on social media at We Are Springtide. There's a hashtag that we've been using. You can email me, directly. My email address is josh@springtideresearch.org. Again, that's josh@springtideresearch.org. And I'm at Dr. Josh Packard on Twitter if you just want to tweet things to me too.
And I'll follow up in our notes. I'll follow up with that information as well, folks. And
fantastic.
Josh, they did get the links to Springtide Institute and everything prior to your talk from things that you put out yesterday. So that was great. Thanks.
Good. Brother Brian Henderson asks, what do young people consider a meaningful interaction? I wonder if there's a lack of appreciation for what could be a meaningful encounter, thereby becoming a meaningful interaction. I agree with you, actually. And I think that this is this is what spiritual and religious leaders can do in the lives of young people, is helping them to understand those things in their life that, that they might otherwise miss as being signs of the presence of the divine in their life. We need some help understanding and interpreting those things. And this is, at Springtide, we take this very clear stance that a young person without a fully developed faith or spiritual life, or considered one, that's just not as good a life. And that's part of the reason why this mission of connecting trusted adults to young people is so urgent for us, because we think there's a lot of young people out there who are just sort of, they're missing even just the beauty and splendor of the natural world and connecting that to the presence of the divine, to take just one small example, let alone somebody saying, hey, how are you? No, really, how are you? As like the sign of God at work on earth. From whatever faith tradition you come out of, I think all of them would agree with that. But I don't think young people experience that, I don't think they experience it that way, and not without the help of a guide. Connor says, as a fellow short human being, that level of transparency and vulnerability really helps build a level of trust. Good showing versus telling. Question is, do you find it important to set ground rules with students for conversations on these matters? And if so, what sort of ground rules do you utilize or find essential? I think that ground rules can be useful in a lot of ways, but they will only matter if you're also demonstrating them. So I'm not each of your contexts will come with different ground rules, and obviously your own faith traditions are going to require you to do not just things out of your own faith traditions, but the realities of the presence of, the way that your your congregation has shown up in that part of the world is going to matter. And so those ground rules can be helpful, but they can't just be, the problem that I have with ground rules is they too often are set by adults to govern the comments and behavior of children. And they don't work both ways. So there are no ground rules for the adult who's setting them, or if there are, the adult gets to set them. And so I would just make sure that you're cognizant of that, and that you're modeling the behavior, because ultimately that modeling is going to be what is generally going to carry the day for them.
Hi, Josh.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Isaac. I'm from Malaysia. And I noticed in your presentation that you've not mentioned about social media. And someone just curious whether, because one of those things while you were presenting, I'm thinking that social media now is the new religion, a lot of everyone is going into that. And so what role does that play in the life of the young people? And it goes in terms of even in interaction, whether it's among themselves or whether with the seniors or the mentors,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I think a lot obviously has been made about social media, but look, we've had new communication technologies come on. I mean, my parents were really worried when we first got the internet because of internet chat rooms. Adults are always worried about music for some reason or another that I haven't been able to quite figure out. My mom's parents were really worried about the telephone when they first got a phone. What social media feels really disruptive right now because we haven't largely established social norms around them, although those are evolving very quickly. And we're settling into a place, I think you're going to find here in the next couple of years, that it's going to, where we start to raise the first generations that have been on social media for a long time, that they're going to be dealing with it and interacting with it in much healthier ways than people who are 20, 25 years old right now. So that's not to say that social media isn't its own challenge. It's just to point out that adults always rise to the challenge. We find ways of cutting through that noise. And sometimes that means engaging directly on that technology. And there's clearly some powerful neurological things going on because these things are, social media is designed in ways that make your brain react more shallowly and not as deeply. But we can show up in those places and we can disrupt that, and we can educate parents and kids around around those things and how to use social media responsibly. I think that it does bring to life some things that maybe we were only teaching in the abstract. Marianne, you asked that question yesterday on Facebook about, you were formed in the image of God. Well, how more real does that lesson get than when your young person is scrolling through Instagram looking at all the influencers who don't look like them and become aspirational for them? How it's then becomes critical as a moment of teaching to be able to drive home the point of no, you are formed in the image of God. Those people are too, but you don't need to be like them, to be the best of who you can be. So I think that I don't get all alarmist over those kinds of things, even though they do need to be, addressed for sure, and we have to be aware of them. Patrick asked if this data would carry over to the Philippines. I'm so interested in that, Patrick. So Springtide year 1, we're focused just on the United States right now, but we're hoping to expand this out, globally as the years come. So I actually don't know, and I'd be really curious to do that research and to hear from others. But I know we're right up close to time, huh?
Just about at time, Josh. I'm pretty sure you'll be hearing from our Filipino LaSallians regarding the opportunity for that. So let me just conclude here by thanking you so much. I think the challenge is how does this research impact our ministry with young people, right? I mean, that's one of the challenging questions. And for LaSallians, though, it really does provide incredible opportunity. And in many ways, I hope that you're feeling affirmed by this particular research in the sense that what Josh shared with us around relational authority, I mean, of course, think of that within the context of our Lasallian heritage, our Lasallian spirituality, our approach to pedagogy, our understanding from even the time of the founder of how to interact with the young people entrusted to our care. So thank you so much for sharing this very timely information. I mean, really, literally, right out of the gate from yesterday. And we would look forward to having you come back in January to share with us the information from the study that is currently being conducted. I'd just like to offer you an opportunity for any concluding remarks before I just do a couple little housekeeping announcements regarding tomorrow.
I'll just say that I couldn't agree more and underscore that point. I mean, I think there's a reason, even though like I'm personally not Catholic, not Lasallian, the more I come to understand the tradition, the more I understand why Springtide was born in this particular space and really out of that impulse. So just to underscore that point, that I think you all have a leg up when it comes to doing this work.
Great. Well, again, thank you so very much for being with us this evening for this presentation. And again, I would like to thank everyone who has joined us from across the Institute over these last several days for our annual Brother Luke Salm Religious Education Workshop. Tomorrow, we have scheduled conversation circles for campus ministers, religion department, or religion teachers, and also our ministry-based vocation coordinators. So while initially I had indicated that the conversation for campus ministers and religion department folks would be closed to Dina, I'm going to offer that invitation far and wide to anybody that feels inclined to join in that conversation. You do have the sign-in information for Zoom in the information packet that I had sent out regarding this workshop. So we'll be having some further conversation around Dr. Packard's presentation to us this evening. And if you're interested in joining that, please know that you are welcome to engage in those conversations. Great. Okay, good. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us for this really inspiring presentation. And Josh, again, thank you so much for your presence with us this evening. Live Jesus in our hearts.